So, as was mentioned, I'm here to talk today about public bicycle share programs. The basic idea of any public bicycle share program is as follows. Get a bunch of bikes, make them identifiable, paint them pink, paint them green, paint them yellow, paint them white, distribute them throughout a city, usually in areas with high population density, and let people use them. Modern implementations of public bicycle share programs typically employ docking stations. So you can see here a program in Barcelona, Spain called Bixi. So you have a docking station. The docking stations are distributed throughout the city. You can get a bike, take it out, and you can bring it back to any other station. The first large-scale public bicycle share program, and when I'm talking about large-scale, I'm talking about larger than 1,000 bikes, was implemented in Lyon, France in 2005. The program in Lyon, called Vélove, or Bicycle Love, involves the implementation of approximately 4,000 bikes at 400 stations. Now, since implementation of Vélove in 2005, the city of Lyon estimates that cycling has increased by 80%, and they attribute part of that increase to the success of Vélove. Now, Vélove was successful, and programs were soon expanded throughout France in particular, but also many other places in Europe. Paris now has the largest public bicycle share program in the world. It's called Vélib, or Bicycle Freedom, and involves the deployment of 20,000 bikes at 1,500 stations. I'll say that again, 20,000 bikes at 1,500 stations. So here's some photos of places I've recently visited, or my friends send me photos all the time of whenever they see a public bike share program, I get a photo of it. So this is Bixi in Barcelona, Spain. We have Boris's Cycle Hire, or Barclay's Cycle Hire, depending on who you think the sponsor is, which was just implemented this summer in London, England. And we have Bixi in Milan, Italy. Now, in the spring of 2009, the city of Montreal decided it would implement a public bicycle share program. This would be North America's first large-scale public bicycle share program. As you know, or as you may not know, the program is called Bixi, and the name merges the words bicycle and taxi. So it's a way to bicycle, but it's also a way to get around. Now, until 2009, until Bixi was implemented in Montreal, bike share programs had never really been implemented in North America. And everyone kind of said, well, it's just a European thing. It's just because, you know, Europe is somehow fundamentally different than North America in terms of its cycling culture. And I was really excited about Bixi in Montreal because I like bikes and I'm interested in cycling. But everyone I talked to was completely negative about the whole idea of public bike sharing. My cyclist friends told me that they weren't going to start cycling because this program was around. They already had their own bikes. They didn't need to share bikes with other people. They didn't need a new way to get around. People who didn't cycle, my friends who didn't cycle, told me, well, I'm not just going to start cycling because there's a bunch of bikes lying around the city. It's not going to work. But 2 years into public bicycle sharing in Montreal, 2 years into Bixi in Montreal, the program is going very well. Just a little bit of background on the program. In Montreal, Bixi involves 5,000 bikes at approximately 400 stations, and the stations are about 300 meters apart. Your average Bixi on a day-to-day basis is used by 3 to 4 different people and travels about 6 kilometers. So what does that mean in terms of usage? The first 4 months of the implementation of Bixi, Bixi users traveled an estimated 3.6 million kilometers. So we're talking about a lot of distance traveled on Bixi bikes. Now, the question that I'm going to try to answer today, or the question that I asked myself is, all these people were really negative about public bike share programs. All my friends told me it wasn't going to work, whether they were cyclists or not. But it did work. Bixi was successful in Montreal. The other sort of interesting thing is that there wasn't large-scale urban planning or urban form changes in Montreal between spring of 2009 and the fall of 2009. It's not like the city of Montreal implemented Bixi and then also installed hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of cycling lanes. The urban form in the city changed very little. Now, I must mention that the city of Montreal is somewhat favorable to cycling. We do have cycling lanes and we do have urban infrastructure that is favorable to cycling. But in spite of very little changes in the urban form in Montreal, the Bixi program was successful. So basically, as we've heard about a lot so far today, my talk is going to sort of revolve around the interaction or the interface between design, users, but I'm also going to talk a little bit more about design and users as sort of a form of representing identity or representing an identity both as an individual. I've got my bike shirt on today, so I can sort of represent my identity as a cyclist, but also how a city is represented as a city where it may or may not be okay to cycle. So the first example, or the first thing I want to talk about in terms of design is the bike itself. I'm going to get down here. So this is a Bixi. And when you're looking at the design of the bike, if you don't know a lot about bikes and you're not really into cycling culture, the first thing that I think about when I look at this bike or when I look at this frame design, if I was sort of stepping out of myself and I'm thinking, this isn't a Bixi, the first thing I think my mom would say is, well, that's a girl's bike, right? It has a low bar, it's easy to step through, and that, to a lot of people, I think, is automatically associated with being a girl's bike. The correct term for this frame is a step-through frame, not a girl's frame. But Bixi makes us rethink gender in cycling. The design of the bike makes us rethink gender in cycling, and that's a really, really good thing, because most people who cycle for transportation tend to be young and tend to be males. So the fact that when people talk about Bixi, they don't talk about a girl's bike, they talk about a Bixi, or they talk about a Vélib, or they talk about a Vélov, makes it really, really interesting as a way to promote cycling. Now, the second thing I want you to think about, and this kickstand is really coming in handy, by the way, in terms of the design of the bike, is imagine Lance Armstrong decked out in spandex, he's got his yellow helmet on, and he's just pedaling as fast as he can down the street. Now, even Lance Armstrong, very fit guy, very, very good cyclist, I don't think he could go much faster than 20 or 30 kilometers an hour on this bike. It's quite heavy, and it only has 3 speeds. The entire idea, or the entire design of the bike itself, is to be able to go slow and to be able to be comfortable while riding in the city. I'm sure you can come up with a whole bunch of other examples. We've got the lovely fenders. It's been raining this past few days in Montreal. We've got fenders, which are great. We've got a basket. But the whole design of the bike sort of makes it accessible to lots of different users. The last thing about the bike, quickly, is the weight. So the bike is quite heavy, and for me, that's a good thing, and I think that's a good design feature, because from a physical activity perspective, the heavier the bike is, every little pedal stroke means that you're expending a little bit more energy, which means that you're burning off a little bit more of those calories that you tend to sort of keep with you as you age or as you try to sort of maintain or lose weight. So the first thing is the design of the bike, and I'm going to move this thing now. Now, the second thing I sort of want to talk about is not the design of the bike, but the design of the system itself. So the bike is one part of the system, but we have a whole bunch of other parts of the system. And what I want you to think about, sort of the classic system problem with public bicycle share programs, is imagine you have two bike docking stations, one at the top of a hill and one at the bottom of a hill. Well, what do you think people are going to do? People are going to cycle down the hill, because bikes are very efficient at going down hills, but they may not really ride as much up the hill. So automatically, you have a redistribution problem. You have bikes that tend to stay in one place. Now, the hill is a simple example, but when you think of a whole system, a city with many hills and a system with 4,000 bikes, 400 stations, you have a redistribution problem. So one way that the program sort of deals with redistribution is they have these big trucks, and you can see the truck there, but you can't see the giant trailer behind it with 100 bikes on it. They go around and they redistribute the bikes, but they don't do so in an unintelligent way. They use data from where the bikes are dropped off and where the bikes end up to inform how they're going to redistribute the bikes. And that's interesting because we have Bixi rush hour. So in the morning, there's lots of Bixis that sort of conglomerate downtown. In the afternoon, they sort of spread out throughout the city where people live. And we also have Bixi sort of distribution differences on the weekend. So Saturday, Sunday, people tend to sort of go to different places rather than just wanting to go downtown. So we have this data gathering that we can use to redistribute the bikes, which is very interesting. The second thing, and honestly, I think it's one of the strengths of the Bixi program compared to other public bike share programs, is there's modular stations. So the station itself is movable because they take them away in wintertime, but it can also expand and retract depending on users' needs. And this is a big difference between other stations where other programs where the station size is fixed. So the modular stations allow the program to sort of meet the demand of users. The station right outside my house actually has expanded 3-fold since the implementation of the program. My house is pretty close to the Montreal, and on Sundays, it's almost impossible to drop off a bike because so many people are going to the Montreal, to the Tam Tam, to do different activities. So that station has sort of been changed to meet the user's demands. So those are sort of the first two general sort of design ideas. We have the bike itself and we have the system. But again, as we've been talking about today, a system or a really nice design without meeting users' needs is kind of useless, right? It's not going to be all that useful for us. Now, I think public bike share programs in general and Bixi meet a lot of different transportation needs. And this is only one example, and I'm sure you can think of other sort of creative ways that you could use Bixi for your transportation. So I'm going to give you one example of a way that Bixi meets one of my transportation needs, and it's sort of a classic transportation problem. It's called the last mile problem. So A, over there you have my house, and C, you have the nearest subway station to my house. I'm going to take a journey to the subway. So I need to somehow get from A to C. The route that was suggested to me by Google Maps was going from A to B to C. That's fine. Now, if I just punch in a few different things into Google Maps, I can get some estimated distances and times depending on my mode of transit. So if I walk, it's going to take me about 15 minutes to walk from A to C, to walk from my house to the nearest subway station. Well, to me, that's a little bit too long. It's going to make my whole journey too long. So I'm not necessarily willing to take that amount of time. Now, what if I take the bus? Try another solution. I'll take the bus. Well, it's 13 minutes. It's marginally faster than walking. I'll just walk faster. I'll get there in 13 minutes. Now, what if I take a taxi, or what if I drive? It's only going to take 4 minutes, but the cost of the taxi is added on top of the cost of public transit, and I have to call a taxi. I have to do all these other things. So what can I do to solve this problem? Well, an obvious answer is I can just avoid the problem altogether and take my car. Right? I can avoid the last mile problem, but add a whole bunch of other potential problems, like trying to park, which is not fun. Or I can sort of maybe try and think about, well, what if I took Bixi, or what if I added Bixi to my potential transportation options? So if I overlay my Bixi stations with my route, you can see how close together they are. I mean, they're kind of everywhere. Depending on which route I take, I have access to 7 different stations, and it allows me to sort of use the transportation in a different way. I can walk half of my route, then I can get on a Bixi. I can go straight from my house to the nearest station, and then to the subway. The best way that I've actually heard it described is it completely allows you to hybridize your transportation. You don't think about, oh, I'm walking, or I'm taking public transit, or I'm taking my bike. You're taking all three. You have all of the options at one time. So that's one example of where I think public bike share programs in general fill a transportation need. The other big one for me is one-way trips. If I'm going to the airport, or if I'm going to the train station, it's really easy for me to take a public bike, drop it off at the nearest station, and leave for a week or two. I would never even consider taking my own bike and locking it in front of a train station for a week, right? It would be gone. So there's sort of another example of where public bike share programs kind of fill this transportation need. So now we have the design, we have filling this transportation need, but there's another thing, or another point that I want to try to make about cycling, about public bike share programs in general, and about what I've talked to with people in Bixi in Montreal. So what I want you to do is take a minute and think about your first experience on a bicycle. Were you happily wobbling down the street? Did you crash and hit your knee? Here's a photo of my first bike, the Baja Racer. And if you're like me, I was so happy watching the ground rush beneath my feet when I was cycling that I crashed right into my neighbor's parked car. So what I think is interesting is that I'm sure all of you in the room can think of your first experience on a public bike, or on a bike, right? You have a memory of either riding a bike or teaching someone to bike. What's interesting is there's a diversity of people in the room. We have a whole bunch of different identities that we share, or that we have. But I think one of the identities that gets lost as we get older is the identity of a cyclist. We have it when we're young, and as we grow, we slowly stop cycling. Our collective identity of what it is to be a cyclist, and that cycling is for everyone, is lost. Basically, our notion of what it is to be a cyclist becomes exclusive. Now, you may have been a bit confused about the title of my presentation. Bixi is the new fixie. If you don't know what a fixie is, imagine a bike messenger. It's probable that the bike messenger you imagine is riding a fixie. A fixie is basically a kind of bike, so I'm not going to get into too many mechanical details about the bike or the pros and cons of riding a fixie. what I want you to think about is the image that these people are portraying when they're riding this bike. They're portraying an image that is associated with, urban culture, that's associated with cycling, that's associated with all these things. I don't think there's many of you in the room who are going to don tight black jeans and start riding one of these bikes down the street. What's important to think about is these people on fixies portray an identity. Well, if riding a fixie can portray an identity, then I think riding a Bixi can do the same. When we ride a Bixi, we sort of regain this collective identity as someone that it's okay to cycle. As individuals, you get back some of those memories that you may have had when you were young and when you were cycling. If you haven't ridden a Bixi, I encourage you to ride one. You're going to feel something, and it's going to feel good. You're going to feel like you're part of something collective. But beyond individuals, cities sort of gain the identity of places where it's okay to cycle. Over the past 10 years, Montreal has become known as one of the #1 cycling cities in North America. I know it may be surprising to those of you from Montreal. But Montreal is slowly becoming known as one of the most sort of cycle-friendly cities in North America. And this reputation is mutually enforcing. The more people in Montreal cycle, and the more we see a diversity of people cycle, the more people are going to start to cycle. We get more Bixis, but we also get more fixies. Right? We don't just get one type of user. We don't just get young males on crazy bikes. We get a diversity of users. But what the heck do public bike share systems do for health? Well, I could cite studies showing that people who cycle for transportation have higher levels of physical activity, lower rates of obesity, lower rates of heart disease, higher good cholesterol, lower bad cholesterol, and are generally happier than those who don't cycle. But I think that public bicycle share programs, we're not sure what they do. I think that they encourage cycling, and that in general is a good thing, and the potential, sort of the gamble that we make is that if we encourage cycling, we also encourage health. So I hope I've conveyed the 3 things that I think contribute to the success of public bike share programs in general, and Bixi in Montreal: design, need, and the creation of a cycling identity. But I don't think of these things as being independent from one another. It's the interaction between the design, the need, and the users that make public bike share programs a success. But more than make you think about the place of bicycles in a city, and your place hopefully on one of those bicycles, I hope that this talk encourages you to get on a bike and go for a ride. I think getting on a bike, going for a ride, and reclaiming your identity as a cyclist has profound implications for the way we drive, our carbon footprint, physical activity, and health. After all, we wouldn't have the expression, "it's just like riding a bike," if it were.